getting there. So today we have Suman, Dr. Suman Nair, with us. I have known Suman for a while. She organized the APAC coaching conference in Mumbai earlier this year. She has been a leader in various of these coaching organizations. She's been through coaching credentials, and she's been, she's certified in multiple assessment techniques that she tells me. I can't remember all of them apart from Enneagram, where he did her basic coaching experience from as well. MBTI, FIRO-B, and I'm sure it is Hogan as well, and multiple other things. And she had been an HR corporate leader with companies like GE, several others. So she combines corporate experience as well as deep work in many of these spaces, which are allied to coaching. So without much other say from me, I would like to introduce Suman to you, and you will all be happy to know that Magda is going to be her guinea pig today. So Suman is going to use Magda's Enneagram results to explain to you the mysteries of Enneagram. Actually, just as an aside, not that I know much about Enneagram, except that, yes, I do use Enneagram in the limited way that I am aware of. And a brief talk with Suman sort of took me into much deeper spaces that I'm exposed to. But when I was with Peter Hawkins in his home at Bath in UK, in his fairly largish estate, there's a part of his garden which he said was Enneagram garden. And then he showed me how the 9 positions were and what they were and so on and so forth, and also explained some of the mystic origins of what Enneagram is. Some of it may or may not be covered today with someone because of the limitations of time. But essentially, what we have requested to do is to explain how Enneagram can be used in coaching and how can it be valued to coaches in terms of working with their clients. Over to you, Suman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ram. Thank you, Magda, for being such a great support. I would like to sort of quickly introduce Enneagram as a construct and look at how it is essentially used for transformation and change. So typically, if you look at the space between the stimulus and the response is where we have an opportunity to choose. And a lot of people, when they ask me about mindfulness practice or practice of the pause before they respond to a given situation, they say, how do I know what to do in that space? You know, what can help me to understand myself? And, you know, through a lot of work and conversations with leaders and seeing through how Enneagram can help in this space, I've also learned that understanding my own Enneagram type helps me to also learn about what is that choice in my response that I make. And this awareness has also helped myself and a lot of leaders to sort of experience that discomfort, because this is the disruption that happens. A lot of us go through, you know, is that really me? I don't know if that is truly me. And with so much of disbelief in psychometrics in many people and all of that, Enneagram helps us to sort of understand self and others in a multiple context. It just does not put any of us into a particular box. And the way Enneagram is described is, it actually helps us to get out of the box, to know what are the different possibilities we have and how we can use Enneagram systemically and open a lot of opportunities for self-learning and working with various other people. So one of the schools I follow in my learnings around Enneagram is the Riso Hudson School. And my learning from there is what I'm going to be presenting to you. So Enneagram is essentially about understanding the differences among people. And it's not just about saying, oh, I'm different from you. A lot of times, even with an Enneagram, you and I can be of the same type, but there are still going to be differences amongst us, because there are so many other elements other than just my core type that influences the way I operate. And I'll share more about it as we go by. Enneagram is also an alternative to seeing everyone as better or less well developed version of me. So it can create that curiosity to know about myself and the others. And that's why it's one of the tools that's picking up, big time globally in personal growth, leadership growth, cultural, the impact it can create on the culture and everything else. So coming straight to the construct of Enneagram, you will notice there's a circle there which connects the numbers 1 to 9. Each of these numbers actually represent a particular type. The type is something that we have developed much early in life, and our type is also the response that we have towards the external stimuli or stimulus. And because it gets formed so early in our life, there's a certain habit formation that happens in our response patterns. And you will all agree that habits is something that we cannot actually ourselves identify. So unless someone point out to us saying, "Hey, have you noticed you tend to do this very often?" That's when possibly we start paying attention to a habit. So Enneagram says that our responses have become our habits. And because we cannot identify this ourselves a lot of times, it might not be very easy for us to bring about change in that. Also, in a coaching conversation, a lot of times, one of the questions I get asked is, how do I use this as a tool with my coachee or with my client? And my humble invitation to the coaches is, would you please look at your own type to begin with within the Enneagram design, and see what are you bringing to the table in that coaching conversation. So I'm going to touch upon both these perspectives of how Enneagram can be useful for us as coaches and how it can be useful in our work with our clients. So coming back to the construct of the Enneagram, there are certain schools of Enneagram which have names or titles for each of the types. And there are certain schools which say just go by the numbers 1 to 9. Because the moment you put a name against a type, it can create already a certain kind of bias in people's minds. But for the sake of our understanding of the Enneagram construct right now, I'm going to use some terminology, some names, some titles for each of the type, and quickly explain to you what each one represents. Type 1 is also called a perfectionist. And when I say is also called a perfectionist, there could be other names that or titles that this particular type can have. So type 1's called perfectionists. Their response to the world always is about reformation or change. These are the people who can um, much before anybody else can, they can identify what needs to be changed. So their motto is, I've come into this world to reform, to bring about change outside me. So there's a lot of positive of having a type 1 personality, because anytime there has to be a change, a type 1 is able to put in systems, change processes, and do whatever is required to bring about the change. One of the derailers of type 1, and when I say derailers, it essentially means that if I become mindless of how I'm using my strength, it can become my derailer. So, one of the derailers for type 1 is that as much I can see outside me what needs to change, it's not very easy for me to see what I need to change internally within myself. So a lot of times a type 1 finds it difficult to agree to or to accept developmental feedback. This can be a derailer for type 1. Type 2, also called as a helper, is somebody who's available all the time and is willing to extend any kind of support to make the others successful. So their motto in life is, I will do what it takes to make you successful. So their whole orientation is about being available. So while it's their strength to nurture, to be a caregiver, to support in growth of the other person, etc., the derailer for it too is there will come a point for them where they start feeling that there is no reciprocation of the care that they are giving to the others. So it's essentially about a point in time where they could start feeling that they are not getting the love and care and affection that they truly deserve. So that can be a derailer for type 2. Moving on to type 3. Type 3s are also called achievers. Working towards a goal is what drives type 3s. They're extremely achievement oriented. They love status. Um, Image matters to them, and their whole persona is that of success and achievement. So they have very high energy because they are driving success and achievement all the time. They're very meticulous, goal oriented, and outcome oriented. The derailer for a type 3 is the persona or the image becomes so important for them that to step back and reflect to see some of their own internal truths um, takes or makes it very difficult for them. So, being able to appreciate the others is not easy for them, while they love to get the appreciation to themselves. If you're all familiar with MBTI, many times type 3 is similar to ESTJ as a profile. So they thrive in the corporate world. The erstwhile expectation that the corporates had about similar to ESTJ is what the type 3 is very similar to. Type 4, also called an individualist or a romantic, is really a person who can be creating magic if left alone. If you push them to work with teams, they'll find it very difficult because there's a certain perception in them about their own talent, their own strengths, and it's very difficult for them to share that space with the others, which is also why they're called individualists. So the derailer for a type 4, like I already mentioned, is not very comfortable to work around with people and contribute to a lot of teamwork. And in my own experience of working with Enneagram for a long time with the corporates, I have found that type 4 is one of those types which you will not find too many in the corporate world. And like sometimes I also share this, is they may not even be coming for an interview to work in the corporate because they don't like structures, they don't like hierarchy, and they love the freedom of individual creation. That's about type 4. Um, Type 5, also called observers, are people who love to work with data. They're very good at analysis. Give them a lot of information, they can make sense out of it. They are like the intellectual type in all the 9 types. So a lot of times you speak to a type 5, they would have read a lot, they would have explored a lot around various subjects. So usually they are in the know of many things. They're like specialists, they're like subject matter experts. The derailer for a type 5 is, typically type 5 statement is, when you have the head, why do you need the body? So they don't really believe so much in building relationships, building rapport, having close knit, even at work, close knit relationships. They go to their own party apparently, and they question what they're doing there. So leave them alone and let them dabble with their own knowledge and information, and they love that space. That's typically a type 5. A lot of times type 5s are also introverted, not very outgoing and social. Type 6s are also called loyalists. um, the reason why they're called loyalists is it's not very easy for a type 6 to trust the others. It takes a longer period of time for them to um, trust anything for that matter, not just people. And because they take that much time to build that trust, when they are able to build that trust, they can stand by a cause, a person, or a situation so solid that you can see them to be loyalists. That's typically a type 6. Type 6s are also seen a lot of times to be risk averse. That's also a derailer for a type 6. So within type 6, there could be some people who could be so risk averse that they're also called phobic 6. So a lot of fear is associated with type 6. That does not mean that they are not successful or they're not achieving in their life. Nothing like that. It's just that they are um, the construct of their responses is essentially coming from lack of trust, and that's what the type 6 is all about. So just to give one quick example, they are also very much prepared to any situation because of this risk aversion. So I met some people who, for example, a lady who's a type 6 will have in their handbag some food items for sure, some first aid items for sure, some stationery items for sure, essentially covering for any kind of mishaps, if at all they experience. And some men I have noticed and I've interacted with who say to me, the toolbox in their car, they actually check if all the tools are in the toolbox every Saturday. It's almost like a checklist for them. So all of this is essentially to be prepared for any mishap that they are anxious to face. They can be a great um, they can be great support to teams, because any organization which wants to create um, the what's it called business continuity plan, a 6 being there in the team can be a great advantage for that team, because they can think about this even before anybody has considered business continuity plan. That's type 6. Type 7s, also called adventurers, they love life. Go to a type 7 and say to them, hey, I want to share with you about a problem I have. They will say to you, first, let's talk about what's going well in life, and then we'll talk about the problem. So for them, it's all about life to be celebrated. So they also like variety. And as part of this celebrating variety is where the adventure comes from. So you talk to a type 7 and they would typically tell you, ah, yeah, I have done paragliding. Oh, yes, I do music. Yeah, I'm a great cook. You would be really surprised with all the things that they would have already tested in their life, and they would have experienced. And a lot of people have a bucket list much later in their life. Type 7s can create a bucket list every week. They love life so much. So the derailer for a type 7 sometimes is in this need for variety, um, and because they can create multiple options to not get bored with life. So the derailer is they have so many options sometimes that they are not able to hold on and make a decision quickly. They can make decision. It's not about the ability. It's just that they have so many options for themselves in any given situation that it can sort of take a longer time. I have a very interesting example around this. I was working with um, client organization here in India, and they are into market research. It's a market research firm. Um, the managing director of the company said to me, our research, the quality of our research is very good, our reporting is very good, but we are losing the market share, and I don't understand what's happening. And we said, okay, let's do an Enneagram conversation with the entire leadership team. So the managing director and his team, we all sat together and we looked at everyone's Enneagram type, etc. Out of the 8 people in the team, there were 4 of them who had type 7 as their preference, as their response to the world, type 7. And then when we further had a conversation around this, they recognized that the research would happen, the reports would get generated, and it would come to some of these key leaders, and those with a 7 type 7 would say, leave it on my table, I will look at it in the morning, and I will give it to you by 11 a.m. the next day. And they would all leave. And type 7s have so many things to do in life that by the time they got to work in the morning, because they had to go to the gym and they got a call from a friend and something else happened, and they want to address everything with similar energy, typically like the extroversion people in MBTI, by the time they come back to work, it's so late that they are responding back on the report gets extended by an hour, and multiple things gets created around this, and finally the report goes to the client a bit later than what they have committed. How many clients will keep waiting for this report when they have to further go ahead and make their decisions about their services and products, right? And this was not something that anybody knew before this team of leaders sat together to look at what's going on. And it was amazing to see how, just because I have certain needs as a type 7, some of the things will get delayed. It's also like having the P preference in MBTI. So the derailer could be the time taken for the decision to be made. That's typically a 7. Moving on to type 8. Type 8s are also called rebels or leaders. Um, they also have a high need to focus on outcomes, very similar to 3. Um, 8s are driven again by a lot of energy. They are the hard working types out of the 9 types. They really work very, very hard. Physically, they work very, very hard. And they want to be present in every situation because they do not want to lose out on what's going on around them. And so they're perceived by the others as power hungry. And 8s are very focused on a fair game. Everything has to be fair. There has to be justice. People need to be, working towards a common goal. Everybody needs to be aligned to the vision. So 8s take enormous responsibility to get all of this going in whichever situation they are, which is also why they're called leaders. So the derailer for a type 8 is this high need to drive towards the outcome, and a lot of physical hard work and everything else, a lot of times they seem to be lacking empathy, because they are like, their motto is just get going and get the task done. And in the process, people experience type 8s as not listening to them, not being sensitive, lacking empathy, etc. That's type 8. Coming to type 9, notice where 9 is sitting in the entire diagram. So nines have actually the vision of everything around them. So because they also have that position of being able to experience all the types quite effectively, so they're quite connected to people. While they're connected to people, they are also in a certain way risk-averse, especially when it comes to relationships. So type 9s are very often operating behind the screen. They're concerned about creating a conflict a lot of times. They want to avoid conflicts with people. They're peace loving people. They're also called peace lovers. So type 9s will do a lot of work, but they will not essentially take credit for the work they have done. And if they feel that any action of theirs can create a conflict, they will immediately step back. Um, a lot of people see type 9 as being lethargic. It's not so much of being lethargic truly, but it's just not wanting to put their head out there because they fear that others might see them to be dominating or controlling, etc. So that's typically a type 9. So for a derailer for a type 9 is the fear of creating conflict very often puts them at the back seat. And people may not necessarily look up to them even when they have the skills and the talent required to lead the team. So these are the 9 types within the Enneagram design. So when you look at Enneagram, what it means is Ennea means 9 in Greek and gram means design. So it's a design of 9. It's the way each of the numbers are sitting there. And it's very interesting if anyone's keen to know, if you can go and Google every point in this design, the distance between any two types in this design has a mathematical calculation to say how they are positioned in this manner and what kind of energy exchange can happen between two types. And so it's quite deep in that sense. So this is one element of Enneagram. The second element of Enneagram is about the wings, and I'll quickly share with you about the wings. You will notice that every type has two adjacent types. For example, type 1 has two types adjacent, which is 9 and 2, which in Enneagram are called wings. Typically, the wings aid a particular type to balance on some of their strengths and derailers. Enneagram literature says, up to a certain age, maybe around 2021, we tend to use one of the wings strongly than the other. And after that, we dabble with both the wings depending on the situation. And the beauty is, if I'm aware that I have both of these types to support me, and with mindfulness and awareness, I can actually be more holistic in a given situation. So that's how the wings support us. Let's say, for example, let's take type 1, and we said type 1 is a perfectionist, and this high need to correct people, correct situation, etc., might create a lot of conflicts for type 1. If they become mindful of this and they can either choose to use type 2, which is a wing, where they say, how do I present my suggestion for change to help the other person grow. That's the two energy, to help the other person grow. So their conversation changes, the way they present their suggestion changes, and hence their relationship with people can be better than operating from a puristic type 1. So similarly, if they look at type 9 energy, type 9 does not want any conflict. So the way the type 9 presents a suggestion is again in a manner that there's not much of a conflict. So one has an opportunity to either pick up the energy from type 2 or type 9, which are their wings, to present their core need, which is reformation, that much better. So similarly, each of the Enneagram type has wings adjacent to them, which can be a great support. The third element of the Enneagram design you will notice are the arrows. You will notice that there is an arrow going towards and the same arrow also going, backwards. So the forward arrow or the towards arrow, which is, let's say, for example, the arrow going from 7 to 1 is called the towards arrow. This is also called the stress arrow. So for a type 7, when you meet a type 7 who's all about fun and adventure and living life king size and everything else, suddenly you will notice under pressure will become a perfectionist. You know, the same type 7, when pushed to the wall, will suddenly start making decisions faster than otherwise when there was no stress. So that's called the stress arrow for a 7. So under stress, 7 picks up a lot of times even the derailers of type 1. So what's the derailer of type 1? They push people towards perfection without really thinking about how it's going to impact that person. So when 7 becomes mindful of what happens to them under stress, then they are able to sort of withhold their high need to push people towards perfection. The same 7, you will notice there is another arrow which is between 7 and 5, but this time the arrow is going from 5 to 7. But for 7, this arrow is called the growth arrow. So if 7 wants to really excel in what they're doing, they could actually pick up some of the positives of type 5. So what are the positives of type 5? Analysis, information, exploration, knowledge gathering, and all of that. So 7, which usually otherwise is sort of assorted, is all over the place with too many options, etc. When they start operating as a 5, they will learn to start focusing on definite information, focusing on definite analysis. So their decision making can become so much more powerful, etc. So that's how 7 can use this arrow, which is the growth arrow. So for every type, you will notice there is an arrow which goes from that number to the other number. So from 8 to 5 is the stress arrow for 8. And between 8 and 2, 2 is the growth arrow for 8. So this is how this, Enneagram gets deeper once we start exploring. And in a coaching conversation, a lot of times, let's say you've been able to use Enneagram and the client is happy to use Enneagram, etc. And you come to a point that your client is of a certain type, and jointly when you are exploring this, your client will say to you, I'm a 2, I'm very good with people, I help people a lot, but a lot of times people say I'm very aggressive, and I wonder where that's coming from. And here Enneagram explains that you are a 2, you are a nurturer. Under stress, when you're pushed to the wall, you will pick up some of the derailers of 8. And 8s like we discussed, is so focused on the task, and they want to be so much in control to get the task completed that they can be seen to be aggressive sometimes. So it helps to sort of have a framework for these conversations. Um, the last element I want to share on this call right now is what's called the energy centers. So there are three energy centers we operate with. So one energy center is also called the heart center. So types 2, 3, and 4 sit in the heart center, and they're driven by what's called the image. They're also sensitive, and each one, the 2 and 3 and 4, relate to emotions in a certain manner. You know, 2s express emotions quite easily. You know, they can cry easily, they can express their emotions easily. 3s actually, you know, can easily mask their emotions because they're so full of image consciousness, etc. 4s express emotions through art a lot of times, through some creative expression a lot of times. So this is how 2, 3, and 4 work in the heart center. 5, 6, 7 work in the energy center, which is also called the thinking center. They are also driven by a strong emotion, which is fear. So 5, 6, 7, you will notice, relate to fear in a certain manner. 5s protect themselves with a lot of information and knowledge. So they're constantly fearing slipping out of an opportunity of not knowing. So 5s are holding things a lot of times. 6s, like we already discussed, want to always be prepared to ensure that they are not surprised by any fear element. 7s look at fear in the eyes, which is where the adventure is coming from. You know, these guys want to do bungee jumping, and you name it, they want to experience it. And it could be different, of course, you know, not that everybody wants to do bungee jumping, but from their own perspective, they want to face fear in a certain manner. 8, 9, and 1 sit in a center called the body center. And they are a lot of times driven by the emotion of anger. So 8 responds to anger by, easily expressing it. 8s can show their anger very easily, which is why they're seen a lot of times as not being sensitive or lacking empathy, etc. 9s actually hide behind the anger because they're afraid that it can cause conflict. And 1s use anger to correct things. You know, 1s are irritated very often. And what is creating that irritation, they want to correct. So we all sit in one of these energy centers. So when you're working with the client, suppose you don't have an opportunity to use the Enneagram as a tool, or you can't put them through a test, etc. Sometimes, if it's okay for you to also use it and your client is okay with it, you can start off checking with the energy centers, which can then slowly lead to one of the types. And you can further explore this with your client or the coach. So, because we have already seen so many aspects of the Enneagram types, Enneagram is called a system and not just a tool. It does not say you're this or that. It says you're this, and explore further and find more. That's why it's called a system. So I'll stop here right now because this is the basic construct of Enneagram. And let's see if any further conversations, questions.
Hi, Suman. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to get Ram back as well.
Sure.
Ask to start video. There we go. I'm fascinated. Partially because you mentioned a few of the ones that came up in my Enneagram, but oh my goodness. Yeah, you need to come back and do like a whole series on this because it's really cool. Ram is back. Ram, questions?
No, I don't have any questions. I mean, there was an inquiry that why you got stuck with just one picture. And so maybe you did it deliberately. I said maybe you did it because you said that you wanted to just stick with the numbers and not the labels. Perhaps that's why, whatever. There was another question about that Enneagram. I didn't even know this. Some Arika spiritual system, apparently. And does it mean that there could be any kind of resistance from other people, from other religions and so on? I didn't even know that it originated from this spiritual system or that. I have used Enneagram for several number of years. But what is your response to that? And then you can psychoanalyze Magda. We give you the rights and authority to do that.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Ram.
Thank you. Ram, I can only share what I have read about the history of Enneagram, that it has gone through some of the spiritual practices, as I have read, since it's really a very, very traditional and very, very old system for personal growth and learning. And beyond that, I really do not have an answer to that question, honestly, right now.
And a simple answer is, have you had anybody tell you, hey, I don't like it because I'm this religion or that religion, and this doesn't come from my religion or whatever?
I haven't experienced that.
Okay, fine. I think that's a good enough answer.
Yeah.
Sure. Leave it to you.
And no, Suman, there's also one more question in the Q&A module. It's interesting to note the stress and growth go back and forth between 3, 6, and 9, but for the others, it spans across and connects them all. Can you explain this? And also, if you want to stop sharing your screen.
Okay. Thank you. Could you read that question again, please?
It is interesting to note that the stress and growth go back and forth between 3, 6, and 9, but for the others, it spans across and connects them all. Can you explain this?
So if you really look at Enneagram as a true growth tool, you will notice there are 3 important elements to the Enneagram design. So there's a circle out there. The circle is saying that in spite of each one of our types being different, we will all still find some common element amongst ourselves, and we are connected universally through that circle. And Enneagram also believes that there is a very powerful symbol of 3 and 7. So 3, 6, 9 actually represents the powerful symbol of 3. And in every practice, every religious practice, spiritual practice, there is a lot of respect to number 3, right? So that's how the 3 are connected. And if you study Enneagram a little further, you will notice that 3, 6, 9 cuts across the 3 energy centers. So people who have these types have a great opportunity for deeper work if they wish to do, through this representation of the triangle. And the others you will notice is actually a 7 point that is connected. And there is also a geometrical representation of this number, which I don't think we have the time to go into, and it's really very, very deep. I would encourage the person to actually read something about these connections after this conversation, maybe.
Awesome. There is also another question just came up on chat. To use Enneagram, I understand the coachee may have to take the test, and goes without saying the coach has to be certified in using the tool or system, like you said. Are there any aspects of this construct that can be useful in a coaching conversation without necessarily using the system?
Yes. If I, as a coach, is also aware of my own type to begin with, and understand, is there certain mental models I am working with because I'm of a certain type, it can help me prepare better for any coaching conversation. That's one. This is the mindfulness practice we could possibly use. One of the mindfulness practices we can use as coaches. 2, in a coaching conversation, you will see patterns emerging. So even without putting a person through a system, your questioning ability can improve that much by having those focused questions around what is that energy the person is operating from, and where are the responses coming from. It can be used there as well.
That's interesting. Someone else asked if one can be a combination of these numbers, and maybe this is a good spot to bring in my results because as you were talking, honestly, like when you're talking about the 7, which was my number one preference that came out, I was just laughing out loud. I muted myself, obviously, but I was laughing. But I'm also just 1 point behind for me is 8 and 3. And I don't identify with the 3 as much. I do identify with the 8 quite a bit. And I really liked when you talked about, the wings and arrows, and you talked about the 5 being something that when a 7 operates in a 5, then they can be very decisive. And it's quite funny. Like I'm a very much shiny object, oh look, a puppy type person. As anyone who's met me or seen webinar, I'm always, energy up to 15. So 7 all the way, 7's for the win. But I'm also very decisive. I'm pragmatic. I get stuff done. I'm definitely, sometimes people don't think I don't come off as empathetic. I'm the person you go to get things sorted in a fair way. I get asked by my family, if you're going to go buy a car, you take Magda with you to negotiate. Like that's what happens. So it's fascinating. Like, anyway, the question was, can these numbers, see, I get distracted, number 7.
Yeah.
Can you be more than one?
That's a great question. And I get this question all the time. And I just saw one more question that just popped up, which said, if we take the test, different tests, does it give the same results or different results and all of that? Look, somehow Enneagram has been so much in use in many countries. So there are so many schools, different schools all over the world, which are practicing Enneagram right now. So all of them have come up with their own test, and there's a merit in many of these tests, which is why this is one system where I definitely encourage people to have a conversation on the report and not just generate the report and sit with it and just read it for yourself and say, okay, I'm this type. Because it's necessary that you have someone who knows Enneagram to have a debrief with you. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, the original practitioners of Enneagram, the people who brought Enneagram to the world in its current format, they are moving away from test taking. They're saying, let's do a narrative Enneagram. So these days, a lot of practitioners are saying, through conversation, let us start establishing where is our energy and not so much about what type I am. Because that can be powerful to know what's driving me. If I understand, anger is what drives me, and at the same time, it's my derailer. That can be so powerful.
Which actually relates to the question that just came up on chat, if you want to take a look. Someone's asking about an example. What kind of questions would a coach ask to understand where the response is coming from? So if you want to ask me some questions, you're more than welcome to. Big warning right now.
So can I put your description up on the screen, Magda?
Sure.
Okay. So
you saved my screenshot, huh?
Sorry, can you see this? Are you able to see your?
No, you're not sharing screen right now.
Okay, so give me a moment. So typically, let's say I'm also going to be speaking as I'm figuring out sharing screen. So typically, let's say it's this. Okay, got this?
Can you see this? Yep. You might want to zoom in because.
I know to do that. Okay, there.
Yeah. Zoom in a lot. There we go. Perfect.
Okay. All right. So
and scroll
let's say
a tiny bit. I'm out so you can see type 1.
Let's say I don't have.
Perfect.
This
okay,
result.
Great. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you very much for sharing your results that we can talk about today. Let's say I don't have this result with me. Okay. And I meet you. And obviously, in my first meeting with you, I'm not going to talk to you about Enneagram. And if unless my client says to me, I've heard about Enneagram, why don't we use it for our coaching? Then it's fine. Some of our clients are not very open to do psychometrics, right? So we can't just put any kind of psychometric tools or systems like this. So what I'm left with is for me to understand, some of your struggles. Let's say you're saying, I'm doing my best, but I don't know what to do about this. Okay. Then I've already started observing your body language, as a coach. And some of the things that stand out for a type 7 is this, the energy and that twinkle in the eye, love for life, and that smile on the face at any time of the day, all of that. So I'm now slowly, moving to asking about 7, right? So maybe one question I can ask you is, how do you go about making a decision when you're faced with something? How do you go about making a decision? Um, as a, what would you answer to that?
I would say a lot of times I just know. Like it's a lot of decisions they're gut based, but it depends on what the decision concerns. So if I need to gather more data, I'll gather more data. I want to be fair. I don't want to hurt anybody, but I also want to be quick about it, and I want to leave the least amount of hurt on the table.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how would you typically describe your day? How would you describe your day?
There's no typical
I'm just
day.
attempting another question. We are not in a coaching conversation, so I'm not continuing that question.
But there's no typical day, right? So that's interesting
Yeah.
too, because I laugh because again, it's shiny objects.
Yeah.
I do make schedules. I do make many different. When you talk about bucket lists, that made me laugh too. It's not necessarily bucket lists, but things to do, or things I want to do, or things I have to do.
Yeah.
At this point in time, in my visual point of view, whatever, I can see at least 3 different lists I've made of things.
Super. Super. I could even ask, what kind of movies do you like to watch? And it will usually, for a type 7, not be any melancholic movies. Usually it is fun, romantic movies or adventurous movies for a type 7,
That would be correct.
Yay. So you establish your type by asking some of these questions, some simple questions, some deeper questions, etc. But mind you, I cannot ask a type 7 really deep questions.
Hey now.
Yeah. It's so much about, don't take me to that space. You want me to reflect, not now. Can I do it later? That's typically a 7 response. So coming to your scores here, it's interesting to see you have the highest score here as type 7. And your next high score is 8 and 3. Here, I further explore to see if naturally your 8 is your wing. Because for a 7, the wing is either a 6 or an 8. And everything you described about the way with which you make a decision is coming from 8. Okay. So, I could ask a question about how do you deal with anger?
Head on.
That's typically an 8, right? Which is your wing. And also now what we're doing is just trying to establish your type and wing. In a coaching conversation, you would already have identified something that you would like to work on, right? And then, as a coach, one would see, where is that coming from? Where is that issue emerging from? Is it because of the 7 type? Is it because of the arrow, the stress arrow, and we said for a 7, the stress arrow is 1. So you tell me, Magda, can you share with me what stresses you? What kind of situation creates stress for you?
Indecisive people create stress. People who are really selfish. And I'm talking about either outwardly selfish or through their actions. Like they do things that to me seems like they obviously are going to hurt somebody else or an animal or whatever with their decision or their actions. And that, like, even just talking about it, I get angry. That's really stressful to me. Detailed work really gets me stressed. Hate detailed work. If I have to do something over and over again, that is like my idea of hell.
So let's pick this up, that if you have to repeatedly do the same thing, you said you get stressed. Is that correct? That was the last statement you made, right? Yeah. So what happens in that situation? Why does that create stress for you?
It's a very good question. I don't know why it creates stress. It just does. It's just the same thing. It's like, surely if I have to do this more than once, there's a way that we can do it that would make me not have to do something more than once. If I have to repeat something in terms of a task, my head goes, okay, automation, how can I make this better? If I have to repeat something to someone, I go to one of two spaces. Either did I say something wrong, or I know I speak fast sometimes, so like I go into self-critical mode as to what did I do wrong that it didn't come across. Or I go to, okay, how can I teach this person? What can I do so that I don't have to repeat myself again in the future? I really go in solution mode, I guess, but it annoys me in the meantime.
Thank you for sharing that. And everything that you were saying was going a check, check, check for type 1. Can I get it right the first time? Can I automate this? How do I bring about that change? So under stress, you don't even have to think, you start operating like a 1, which is operating from the space of perfectionist, like a thinking and possibly acting like a perfectionist. Okay. The difference is, as a 7, when you operate as a 1, you're already going there because of stress. So what you project on people is coming from that stress. So which is not a very healthy conversation. There can be anger, there can be irritation, there can be so many things that's happening. Okay, which can be like a drop in the ball. But if you become aware, this is what happens to me when I become stressed. What other opportunity I have within Enneagram that I can possibly look at, which I'm not doing so right now. So if you look at the Enneagram construct, we said for a type 7, a 5 is the growth space. Type 5 is the growth space. And for you, that has a score of 2. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So if I were, if we were in a conversation, I would have said, or asked you, how do you recover from that stress situation? What do you actually do to ensure you don't get into such situation again?
Drink lots of wine. Just kidding.
I could have answered that for you.
Hey, now.
Okay, so we are almost on top of the. Sorry about that, Suman.
Sure. Yeah.
What interests me more, maybe it's a completely different subject we can get on to. My own profile is 8 is my highest, 3 is the next highest, and I think 1 and 7 are probably about there. So certainly, I mean, for our getting along together, this it's a very similar kind of profile.
That was a high five, Ram. High five.
Yeah, high five. Yeah, I guess that's a next stage of supposing, like I often use MBTI for that. I don't know enough of Enneagram. In terms of in teams, how do people get along together? What are their scores and what are their profiles? That gives me a lot of insights into the way that they would behave. And like, for example, I always tell people that if there is one P amongst multiples who work for a J, that can drive the J mad, whereas for a P, it doesn't make a difference what kind of a person there is, that kind of a stuff. So Enneagram helps in that as well. Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Sorry, Ram, but Suman, also, like, if anyone is interested and if you're interested, please email me, because I would personally be fascinated to hear more about this. As Ram said, in terms of teams, but also in terms of family constructs. Before this session, my sister and I are so opposite in so many ways. And we often joke that I'm older. So when I was born, when I came out, we say, I took a bunch of stuff that my parents had to give, and I left very little of those things. And then it took like almost nothing of the others. And when Nika came out, she took majority of the things that I lacked, and vice versa, right? So there couldn't be a third kid because we both, we took 100% of everything. And I wanted to see before this session, and she is a 9 was her strongest, a 6 and a 4. And it cracked me up how, things that I scored low, she scored high, and it proves our theory. So it'd be interesting to see like how this works in a family dynamic and a sibling dynamic. It's a fascinating subject.
You will notice that a 7 sits in the thinking energy center and the 9 sits in the body energy center. And there has to be some work that needs to happen to be together. Siblings, of course, is easier. In a work relationship, there has to be some work to get the two people to work together. And like Ram said, it can be beautifully used for teams and for systemic coaching and all of that.
In fact, that's something that we need to look at, Magda, because Suman did tell me that she does a lot of work with systemic coaching. And I think that will be very, very powerful in what we are trying to do. Yeah. Okay.
Love it.
Would you like to close? Thank you very, very much, Suman. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Suman, this was awesome. Thank you. So everyone, thank you. If you're listening on YouTube, watching on YouTube, or if you're in the chat, I've just put the link to Claiming CCEUs. For those of you who are on YouTube, it's learn.coacharya.com. You've been there before. Once you get there, there's a section called CCEU. When you click on that, you'll see today's webinar. So even if you're not on chat, you can still see it. And today's password is, what's his password? The enthusiast. So I didn't put 7, but the enthusiast. I figured might as well, speak for my people.
Yeah, absolutely. Put your name out there for posterity, at least in the way of password. Okay.
Exactly. So Claiming CCEUs, everyone, this week. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think we'll see Suman here again because we're fascinated.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
It was great fun. Yeah.
Thank you.